February 26, 2024. Kissimmee, Florida. Madeline Soto woke up that Monday morning like any other school day. She was 13 years old, an 8th grader at Hunters Creek Middle School. A quiet girl, liked art, liked reading, just a normal teenager trying to navigate middle school. Before we continue, if you want to stay updated on cases demanding justice and accountability, please like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support helps shine a light on stories that need to be heard. She lived with her mother, Jennifer Soto, in a neighborhood in Kissimmee. That's a city just south of Orlando. Regular middle-class area. The kind of place where families feel safe. Jennifer's boyfriend, Stephan, had been living with them for the past few years. He was 37 years old, worked in tech. He'd been dating Jennifer since Madeline was about 10. Madeline had known him for years. He was part of the family, part of her daily life. That morning, Madeline got ready for school, put on her uniform, grabbed her backpack. Everything normal, everything routine. Around 8 a.m., Stephan offered to drive Madeline to school. Jennifer was getting ready for work. It made sense. Stephan had driven Madeline to school plenty of times before. There was no reason to think this morning would be any different. Madeline got in the car with Stephan. They left the house together. Jennifer went to work. She had a full day ahead. She assumed Madeline was at school. Why wouldn't she? Everything seemed fine. But when Jennifer got home that afternoon around 4 p.m., Madeline wasn't there. At first, Jennifer didn't think much of it. Maybe Madeline went to a friend's house after school. Maybe she stayed late for a club or activity. But then Jennifer checked the time. It was past 4. Madeline should have been home by now. Jennifer called out for her daughter, checked her room, checked the house. No Madeline. She tried calling Madeline's phone, straight to voicemail. She texted Stephan. "Have you seen Madeline?" He responded, said he'd dropped her off at school that morning, said everything was fine, but something felt wrong. Jennifer called the school, asked if Madeline had been there today. The attendance office checked their records. No, Madeline Soto had been marked absent. She never showed up to school that morning. Jennifer's heart stopped. Her 13-year-old daughter had left for school 8 hours ago and never arrived. Where was she? She called Stephan again, told him what the school said, asked him what happened. Where did he actually take Madeline? Stephan insisted he dropped her off at school, said he watched her walk toward the building, said he had no idea why she wasn't there. Jennifer's panic grew. Nothing about this made sense. Madeline wouldn't just skip school. She wouldn't run away. Something was very wrong. At 4:30 p.m. on February 26th, Jennifer Soto called 911. Her daughter was missing. Kissimmee Police Department responded immediately. Missing child cases are always top priority. Officers arrived at Jennifer's house within minutes. They interviewed Jennifer, got all the details. Madeline left for school with Stephan around 8 a.m. School says she never arrived. Phone is off. No one has seen her since she got in that car this morning. Officers asked the standard questions. Was Madeline depressed? Having problems? Any reason she might run away? Jennifer said no. Madeline was fine. She had no reason to disappear. This wasn't like her at all. The police brought Stephan in for questioning. He was the last person to see Madeline. They needed to understand exactly what happened that morning. Stephan repeated his story. He drove Madeline to school, dropped her off around 8:15 a.m., watched her walk toward the building. Then he left for work. He didn't know where she went after that. The officers pressed him. What did Madeline say during the drive? Did she seem upset? Did she mention going anywhere else? Stephan said she was quiet, normal, nothing unusual. She got out of the car and walked toward the school. That was the last time he saw her. The police immediately started searching. They went to the school, pulled security footage, checked every camera angle showing the drop-off area and entrances. They watched footage from that morning, saw dozens of students arriving, buses, parent cars, kids walking, a normal Monday morning at a middle school. But Madeline Soto wasn't in any of the footage. She never arrived at school. Officers drove the route from Madeline's house to the school, checked every street, every parking lot, every place a 13-year-old might stop on the way to school. Nothing. No sign of her. As Monday evening arrived, Madeline had been missing for more than 8 hours. The police expanded their search. They contacted her friends, checked social media, posted alerts, put out a missing person bulletin with Madeline's photo. A 13-year-old girl, last seen wearing her school uniform, brown hair, brown eyes, 5 feet tall, about 100 pounds. If anyone had seen her, they needed to call police immediately. But no calls came in. No sightings. No leads. Tuesday, February 27th. Madeline had been missing for over 24 hours now. Tuesday, February 27th. Madeline had been missing for over 24 hours now. The case was escalating. More detectives assigned. More resources deployed. The FBI was notified. Missing children cases often become federal quickly. Detectives focused more on Stephan Stearns. His story needed to be verified. They needed to confirm everything he claimed about that morning. They asked him for his phone, to check his GPS data, to verify his timeline. Stephan agreed. He handed over his phone voluntarily, said he wanted to help, said he had nothing to hide. Digital forensics began analyzing the phone immediately, extracting data, building a timeline of Stephan's movements that morning. While they worked on that, other detectives interviewed Jennifer again. They needed to know everything about Stephan, about his relationship with Madeline, about their home life. Jennifer said Stephan had been wonderful. He'd been patient with Madeline, helped her with homework sometimes, drove her places, acted like a father figure. Jennifer had trusted him completely. Had there ever been any problems? Any concerns? Jennifer said no. Never. Stephan seemed to genuinely care about Madeline. There were never any red flags. Nothing that made Jennifer worried. But detectives had learned something from years of experience. The people we trust the most are often the most dangerous. Predators don't look like monsters. They look like normal people. They gain trust. They blend in. That's what makes them so effective. And something about Stephan's story wasn't sitting right with detectives. The way he described that morning felt rehearsed. Too clean. Too simple. Wednesday, February 28th. Still no sign of Madeline. 48 hours missing. The chances of finding her alive were dropping with every passing hour. The digital forensics team finished their initial analysis of Stephan's phone. They came to the detectives with their findings, and what they found changed everything. Stephan's GPS data from the morning of February 26th told a very different story than the one he'd been telling police. He didn't drive Madeline to school that morning. His phone showed him leaving Jennifer's house around 8 a.m. That part was true. But he didn't head toward Hunters Creek Middle School. He drove in the opposite direction, north, toward a rural area of Osceola County. Away from populated areas, away from schools and businesses, toward woods and fields and empty roads. His phone stayed in that area for approximately 90 minutes, from 8:15 a.m. to around 9:45 a.m. Then the GPS showed movement back toward Kissimmee, back to more populated areas. And Madeline's phone? It stopped pinging after 8 a.m., right around the time she got in Stephan's car. Detectives confronted Stephan with this information. They brought him back in for questioning on Wednesday afternoon. Your GPS doesn't match your story. You didn't drive to the school. You drove to a rural area north of here. You stayed there for 90 minutes. What were you doing there? Where's Madeline? Stephan's demeanor changed. He got nervous, started sweating. His hands were shaking. He tried to backtrack, said maybe he'd gotten confused. Maybe he went somewhere else first. Maybe his memory was wrong. But GPS data doesn't lie. And his phone placed him in that rural area for an hour and a half on the morning Madeline disappeared. We're going to search that area, the detectives told him. And if we find anything there, you need to tell us now. Because once we find evidence, it's too late to cooperate. Stephan asked for a lawyer. The interview ended, but detectives were already mobilizing. They had coordinates from Stephan's phone. They knew exactly where to search. Search teams headed to northern Osceola County, to the area where Stephan's phone had pinged for 90 minutes on Monday morning. It was rural out there, scattered houses, lots of undeveloped land, woods, fields, the kind of place where you could be alone, where nobody would see you. K9 units were brought in, dogs trained to detect human scent. They started searching the areas matching Stephan's GPS coordinates. Thursday, February 29, 2024, 3 days since Madeline disappeared. The search dogs alerted to an area off a dirt road, deep in the woods, away from any main streets, the kind of place you'd only go if you had a specific reason. Officers approached carefully. They didn't know what they'd find, but they feared the worst. And there, in that wooded area, they found her. Madeline Soto, 13 years old. She was deceased. The officers called it in immediately. The area was secured. Crime scene investigators were dispatched. The medical examiner was notified. Jennifer Soto was informed that her daughter had been found, that she was dead. Her worst nightmare was confirmed. A mother's world shattered in that moment. The daughter she'd been praying would come home safe was gone. And the man she'd trusted, the man she'd let into her home, the man she'd let around her daughter, he was responsible. Detectives arrested Stephan Stearns that same day. Thursday, February 29th. He was charged initially with evidence tampering and providing false information to law enforcement. But everyone knew more charges were coming. The medical examiner began processing Madeline's body, determining cause of death, collecting evidence, building the case. While that was happening, digital forensics continued analyzing Stephan's phone, and what they found went far beyond a single morning in February. They found photos, hundreds of photos, of Madeline, photos that no mother's boyfriend should have, photos that no adult should have of a 13-year-old girl, sexual photos, explicit images, pictures taken over years, starting when Madeline was even younger. The forensics team felt sick looking at what they found. This wasn't just a murder. This was years of abuse, years of exploitation, years of a predator living with his victim. They found videos too, disturbing videos, evidence of sexual abuse going back years, evidence that Stephan Stearns had been abusing Madeline for most of the time he'd known her. And Jennifer had no idea. She'd trusted him. She'd believed he cared about Madeline. She'd let him have access to her daughter, and he'd used that access to commit horrific crimes. On March 1st, 2024, additional charges were filed against Stephan Stearns. 60 counts related to sexual abuse of a minor, possession of child sexual abuse material, sexual battery, molestation. The charges kept coming as investigators documented everything they found. And then, weeks later, the charge everyone was waiting for: first-degree murder. The medical examiner had determined Madeline died from asphyxiation. She'd been strangled, and based on the evidence, she died on the morning of February 26th, probably in Stephan's car, probably shortly after they left Jennifer's house. Stephan never drove Madeline to school that morning. He killed her. Then he drove her body to that rural area, left her in the woods, and came back to carry on with his day like nothing happened. If you believe survivors and families deserve support as they seek justice, please like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications. These stories matter and need to be heard. The investigation into Stephan Stearns revealed a horror that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Detectives started building a timeline of the abuse, using the photos and videos found on Stephan's devices, using metadata that showed when images were created, using digital evidence that painted a picture of systematic, ongoing exploitation. The abuse started not long after Stephan began dating Jennifer, when Madeline was around 10 years old. That's when the earliest images were dated. At first, they were seemingly innocent photos, pictures of Madeline doing normal kid things. But as investigators looked closer, they noticed something disturbing. The camera angles, the poses, the way Madeline was positioned. These weren't normal family photos. These were photos taken by someone with predatory intent. And as time went on, the photos became more explicit, more sexual, more disturbing. By the time Madeline was 11, Stephan was regularly sexually abusing her. The evidence was overwhelming. Hundreds of images, dozens of videos, all meticulously saved on his devices. Investigators had to watch this material, had to document it, had to use it to build the case. It was one of the hardest parts of their job, seeing what this child had endured, knowing she'd lived with her abuser every single day. The abuse happened in Jennifer's home, in Madeline's bedroom, in bathrooms, in common areas when Jennifer wasn't home. Stephan had complete access to Madeline, and he used that access to victimize her repeatedly. Detectives wondered if Madeline had ever tried to tell anyone. Had she shown signs? Had there been red flags that were missed? They interviewed Madeline's teachers, asked if they'd noticed anything concerning. Changes in behavior, signs of abuse. Some teachers said Madeline had become more withdrawn over the past year or two, quieter, more isolated, but they'd attributed it to normal teenage changes, to middle school social dynamics. They hadn't suspected abuse. They interviewed Madeline's friends, asked if Madeline had ever said anything about Stephan, about feeling uncomfortable, about anything inappropriate. One friend said Madeline had mentioned once that she didn't like Stephan, that he was weird, but she hadn't elaborated, and the friend hadn't thought much of it. Lots of kids don't like their parents' boyfriend or girlfriend. Another friend said Madeline had become more secretive about her home life in recent months, didn't want friends coming over anymore, made excuses when people asked. But again, this hadn't raised major concerns. The signs were there, but they were subtle, easy to miss, easy to explain away. That's how predators operate. They're careful. They groom their victims. They isolate them. They make sure the abuse stays hidden. As the investigation continued, detectives had to inform Jennifer about what they'd found, about the years of abuse, about the evidence on Stephan's devices. Jennifer was devastated. She'd had no idea. She'd trusted Stephan. She'd believed he was good to Madeline. She'd never suspected he was capable of something like this. She blamed herself. How did she not know? How did she not see it? Her daughter was being abused in her own home and she missed it. Detectives tried to explain. Predators are skilled at hiding their crimes. They manipulate. They deceive. They present one face to adults while showing another to their victims. It's not Jennifer's fault. She was deceived just like Madeline was. But that didn't ease Jennifer's guilt. Her daughter was dead, and the man who killed her had been abusing her for years, right under Jennifer's nose. Jennifer cooperated fully with the investigation. She answered every question, provided access to everything detectives needed. She wanted justice for Madeline. She wanted Stephan to pay for every single thing he did. Prosecutors began building their case. They had physical evidence, digital evidence, GPS data, medical examiner findings, witness statements, everything they needed to prove Stephan murdered Madeline. But they also wanted to prove the sexual abuse charges. They wanted Stephan held accountable for every crime he committed against this child. The decision was made to try the sexual abuse charges first. Those would go to trial in February 2025. Then the murder charge would be tried separately later in the year. This strategy served multiple purposes. It would establish Stephan's pattern of abuse. It would show his relationship with Madeline. It would demonstrate motive for why he might have killed her. Because the question everyone was asking was, why? Why did Stephan kill Madeline on February 26, 2024? What happened that morning that led to her death? Investigators developed a theory based on the evidence they had. Madeline was 13. She was getting older, more aware, more capable of understanding that what Stephan was doing to her was wrong, more capable of potentially telling someone. There was evidence that Madeline had started resisting Stephan's abuse in the weeks before her death. Digital evidence showed she'd been researching abuse, looking up information about reporting, reading about what happens when abuse is disclosed. Investigators believed Madeline was planning to tell someone, maybe a teacher, maybe a counselor, maybe a friend's parent, someone, and Stephan knew it, or feared it. He couldn't risk Madeline exposing him, couldn't risk losing his freedom, couldn't risk going to prison. So he made a decision. On the morning of February 26th, he killed her. It was calculated, premeditated. He knew Jennifer was going to work. He offered to drive Madeline to school, got her alone in his car, killed her, disposed of her body, and tried to cover it up. But he made mistakes. His GPS gave him away. His digital footprint betrayed him. And investigators were thorough enough to find all the evidence. Stephan Stearns was held without bail at the Osceola County Jail. He was in protective custody because even among criminals, crimes against children are viewed with particular hatred. He had no visitors except his lawyer. His family had cut ties. His friends wanted nothing to do with him. He was alone, as he deserved to be. While Stephan sat in jail, Jennifer tried to process her grief, tried to understand how this happened, tried to find a way forward. She had to plan Madeline's funeral, had to say goodbye to her daughter, had to face the community knowing that her boyfriend had killed her child. Some people blamed Jennifer, said she should have known, said she should have protected Madeline, said she failed as a mother, but others showed compassion, understood that Jennifer was a victim too, deceived by a predator, manipulated by someone who presented himself as trustworthy. The truth is complex. Jennifer made the decision to let Stephan into their lives, into their home, but she didn't know who he really was. She didn't know what he was capable of. Should she have seen signs? Maybe, but predators are skilled at hiding, at manipulating, at making people believe they're safe. Jennifer would carry guilt for the rest of her life. That's her burden. That's her punishment. Knowing she trusted the wrong person. Knowing that trust cost her daughter's life. If justice for vulnerable victims matters to you, please like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Cases like Madeline's show why awareness and accountability are critical. As 2024 progressed, the case against Stephan Stearns grew stronger. Prosecutors continued collecting evidence, building their strategy, preparing for trial. The community of Kissimmee was shaken by Madeline's death. Parents held their children tighter. Schools increased security. People looked at neighbors and family friends with new suspicion. Because if Stephan Stearns could hide his crimes for years, who else might be hiding something? How many other predators were living among them? Schools in the area implemented new training for teachers. How to recognize signs of abuse. How to create safe environments for children to disclose. How to respond when abuse is suspected. Child advocacy groups used Madeline's case to push for stronger protections. In September 2024, prosecutors filed a motion to seek the death penalty against Stephan Stearns for Madeline's murder. Florida still has capital punishment, and this case met the criteria: a child victim, premeditation, pattern of abuse, multiple aggravating factors. Stephan's defense team fought against the death penalty designation, argued it was excessive, argued their client deserved a chance at life even if in prison. But the judge allowed it. The death penalty would remain on the table as the case moved forward. The first trial was set for February 2025. The sexual abuse charges, 60 counts, each one representing a specific incident of abuse documented through photos, videos, or other evidence. Prosecutors knew this trial would be difficult. They'd have to present graphic evidence, show disturbing images, walk the jury through years of systematic abuse. But it was necessary. These crimes needed to be proven. Stephan needed to be held accountable for everything he did to Madeline. The trial began on February 24, 2025, almost exactly 1 year after Madeline's death. The courtroom was packed. Media from across Florida, national outlets, true crime followers, community members who wanted to see justice. Stephan was brought in wearing a suit, shackled, his expression blank. He'd lost weight in jail, looked older, but showed no emotion. Jennifer Soto was in the courtroom, She'd chosen to attend despite how painful it would be, despite knowing she'd have to hear details about what happened to her daughter. She needed to be there, for Madeline, to witness Stephan being held accountable. Jury selection took several days. The case had received significant media coverage. Finding impartial jurors was challenging. But eventually, 12 jurors and 3 alternates were seated. Opening statements began. The prosecution went first. Over the next several weeks, you're going to hear evidence about crimes committed against a child named Madeline Soto. Crimes committed by the defendant, Stephan Stearns. Crimes that started when Madeline was just 10 years old and continued until the day he killed her. The prosecutor outlined what they'd prove. The timeline of abuse. The evidence found on Stephan's devices. The pattern of grooming and exploitation. This is not a case of he said, she said. This is a case where the defendant documented his own crimes, took photos, recorded videos, saved them on his devices. The evidence is clear. The evidence is overwhelming. And the evidence will prove beyond any doubt that Stephan Stearns systematically abused Madeline Soto for years. The defense's opening was brief. They acknowledged that evidence existed, but suggested it needed to be examined carefully. That not everything was as clear as the prosecution claimed. It was a weak opening, because how do you defend against hundreds of images showing abuse? Against videos documenting crimes? Against digital evidence that's irrefutable? The prosecution began presenting their case, witness by witness, piece of evidence by piece of evidence. First was Jennifer Soto. She testified about her relationship with Stephan, about how he became part of their family, about how she trusted him with Madeline. She cried throughout her testimony, apologized repeatedly to her daughter, said she was sorry for not protecting her, for not seeing what was happening. It was heartbreaking to watch, a mother's guilt on full display. Next came the digital forensics experts. They testified about what they found on Stephan's devices. They showed the jury sanitized versions of the evidence, descriptions rather than actual images, to spare the jury from having to see the worst of it. But even the descriptions were disturbing. The jury looked sick. Some looked angry. All looked horrified by what they were hearing. The timeline was established. Years of abuse, hundreds of incidents, a pattern of systematic exploitation. Madeline's pediatrician testified, said she'd seen Madeline for regular checkups, never noticed signs of physical abuse, but acknowledged that sexual abuse can be difficult to detect if there's no physical trauma. Madeline's teachers testified, talked about how Madeline had changed over the years, become more withdrawn, more isolated, but said they hadn't suspected abuse. Child psychologists testified, explained grooming, explained how predators operate, explained why victims often don't disclose, why they feel powerless to stop the abuse. Day after day, the prosecution built their case. The evidence was overwhelming, damning, irrefutable. The defense tried to cross-examine, tried to create doubt. But what could they say? The images existed. The videos existed. The evidence was clear. Their strategy seemed to be making sure the jury understood that Stephan had mental health issues, that he needed help, not just punishment, that there were explanations for his behavior beyond just being evil. But the jury didn't seem receptive. This wasn't about mental health. This was about a man who deliberately, repeatedly, systematically abused a child for years. After 3 weeks of testimony, the prosecution rested. They'd presented everything they had, every piece of evidence, every witness, everything needed to prove Stephan's guilt on all 60 counts. The defense put up minimal case. A few character witnesses who testified Stephan seemed like a normal person, that he'd never shown signs of violence or perversion in their interactions with him. But that's how predators work. They show different faces to different people. They hide their true nature from everyone except their victims. The defense's case lasted less than 2 days. Then they rested. Closing arguments came. The prosecution reminded the jury of everything they'd seen, everything they'd heard, the overwhelming evidence of systematic abuse. Stephan Stearns had access to Madeline Soto. He used that access to abuse her, to exploit her, to victimize her repeatedly over years. He documented his crimes. And now those documents prove his guilt. You've seen the evidence. You know what he did. Your verdict must reflect that truth. The defense's closing was desperate. They asked for mercy, suggested maybe not all 60 counts were proven beyond reasonable doubt. Asked the jury to consider that Stephan was sick, not evil. But it rang hollow. The jury had seen the evidence. They knew exactly what Stephan had done. The jury deliberated for less than 1 day. They came back with their verdict. Guilty. On all 60 counts. Jennifer Soto cried. Stephan showed no reaction. The jury had spoken. He was guilty of every single charge. Sentencing would come later. But with 60 convictions for sexual abuse of a minor, Stephan was facing decades in prison even before the murder trial. The sexual abuse convictions were just the first step. The murder trial was still coming. Prosecutors had proven Stephan's pattern of abuse. Now they needed to prove he killed Madeline, and prove it was premeditated first-degree murder. The murder trial was scheduled for September 2025, more than a year and a half after Madeline's death. The delay was normal for capital cases. Both sides needed time to prepare. The stakes were high. If convicted of first-degree murder, Stephan faced the death penalty. His defense team filed numerous motions, trying to get evidence suppressed, trying to get the death penalty removed from consideration, trying to change venue due to pretrial publicity. The judge denied most motions. The evidence was properly obtained. The death penalty was appropriate given the circumstances. And while there was media coverage, an impartial jury could still be found. While waiting for trial, Stephan remained in jail. After his convictions on the sexual abuse charges, any chance of bail was completely gone. He spent his days in a cell, 23 hours a day in lockup, 1 hour for recreation, no contact with other inmates because of the nature of his crimes. He received hate mail from around the country, people who'd followed the case, who were disgusted by what he'd done, who wanted him to know how despised he was. His family didn't visit, didn't write, didn't want anything to do with him. He was completely alone. Jennifer Soto tried to rebuild her life, tried to process her grief and guilt, tried to find some semblance of normal. She moved out of the house where she'd lived with Stephan and Madeline. Couldn't bear to be there anymore. Too many memories, too much pain. She went to therapy, tried to work through her trauma, tried to understand how she'd been so thoroughly deceived. She started speaking publicly about her experience, doing interviews, talking about grooming, about how predators operate, about warning signs parents should watch for. Some people criticized her for this, said she was trying to absolve herself of responsibility, said she was making Madeline's death about her own victimhood. But others saw value in her story, saw a mother trying to prevent other children from suffering Madeline's fate, trying to educate other parents, trying to honor her daughter's memory by creating awareness. As September 2025 approached, the community of Kissimmee prepared for another trial, another round of media attention, another examination of Madeline's death. The murder trial began on September 22, 2025. Jury selection took even longer this time. The death penalty was on the table. That meant extensive voir dire, making sure jurors could consider capital punishment, making sure they could be impartial despite the sexual abuse convictions. Finally, a jury was seated. The trial began. The prosecution's strategy was straightforward. Show what Stephan did on February 26, 2024. Prove Madeline died that morning. Prove Stephan killed her. Prove it was premeditated. Opening statements laid out the timeline. Stephan offered to drive Madeline to school, killed her shortly after leaving the house, drove her body to a rural area, disposed of it, then went about his day pretending nothing happened. This wasn't an accident, the prosecutor said. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a calculated decision. Stephan Stearns knew Madeline was getting older, knew she might disclose the abuse, knew his life would be destroyed if she spoke up. So he made sure she never could. He murdered her. Then he tried to cover it up. But the evidence will prove exactly what he did. The defense's strategy was more complex this time. They couldn't deny Stephan was involved in Madeline's death. The evidence was too strong. His GPS placed him at the scene. His lies to police proved consciousness of guilt. Instead, they tried to argue it wasn't first-degree murder. They suggested maybe something happened that morning. Maybe there was a confrontation. Maybe Stephan panicked. Maybe it wasn't planned. They were hoping for a lesser charge. Second-degree murder. Manslaughter. Anything that would take the death penalty off the table. The prosecution began presenting evidence. The GPS data showing Stephan's route that morning. The medical examiner's testimony about cause of death. The evidence from the crime scene. Detectives testified about Stephan's lies. About how his story kept changing. About how he'd tried to cover his tracks. Digital forensics experts testified about Madeline's phone going dead shortly after 8 a.m. About Stephan's searches in the days before Madeline's death. Searches about missing persons. About police investigations. About evidence disposal. These searches showed premeditation. Showed Stephan was thinking about this before it happened. Planning. Researching. Preparing. The most damning evidence came from Stephan's own devices. In the weeks before Madeline's death, there were signs his control was slipping. Messages between Madeline and her friends showed she was becoming more resistant. More vocal about not wanting to be around Stephan. More willing to express discomfort. Stephan had found these messages. Had seen Madeline was starting to push back. And that's when he started his searches about missing persons and evidence. The timeline made it clear. Stephan saw his control slipping. Saw the possibility of Madeline disclosing. And decided to eliminate that possibility permanently. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't panic. This was premeditated murder. Jennifer testified again. About the morning of February 26th. About Stephan offering to drive Madeline to school. About not suspecting anything was wrong. She described the hours of worry when Madeline didn't come home. The fear. The panic. The hope that somehow Madeline would be found safe. And then the devastating news that her daughter was dead. That Stephan had killed her. Jennifer's testimony was emotional. Painful. The jury listened with visible sympathy. After weeks of testimony, the prosecution rested. They'd proven their case. Stephan killed Madeline. It was premeditated. It was first-degree murder. The defense put on their case. They called mental health experts, psychiatrists who'd evaluated Stephan, who testified about his depression, his anxiety, his inability to cope with stress. They suggested that on the morning of February 26th, Stephan was in crisis, that something pushed him over the edge, that he acted impulsively rather than with premeditation. But the prosecution's cross-examination destroyed this theory. They asked about the searches Stephan had done before Madeline's death, about the planning, about the GPS route he took that was deliberate and calculated. If he was in crisis, why did he take such a specific route? Why did he dispose of evidence so carefully? Why did he lie to police with such precision? The answer was clear. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned. The defense rested after just a few days. They didn't have much to work with. The evidence was too strong. Closing arguments came. The prosecution hammered home the premeditation, the planning, the calculated nature of Madeline's murder. Stephan Stearns abused Madeline Soto for years, and when she started to resist, when she started to threaten his control, he killed her. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't panic. This was murder, premeditated, first-degree murder, and the evidence proves it beyond any doubt. The defense's closing was desperate. They begged the jury to see this as something less than first-degree murder, to see Stephan as a broken man who made a terrible mistake. But the jury had seen the evidence. They knew better. The jury deliberated for 2 days on the murder charge. On the third day, they reached a verdict. The courtroom filled. Jennifer was there. Media packed the gallery. Community members who'd followed this case from the beginning waited to hear the outcome. Stephan was brought in, still showing no emotion, still blank, still refusing to acknowledge what he'd done. The judge asked if the jury had reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of first-degree murder, how do you find the defendant?" "Guilty." Jennifer broke down. Finally justice for Madeline. Guilty of first-degree murder. The highest charge. The charge that reflected the true nature of what Stephan had done. Stephan showed nothing. No reaction. No emotion. Just emptiness. But the trial wasn't over yet. In Florida, capital cases have two phases: the guilt phase and the penalty phase. The jury had found Stephan guilty. Now they had to decide whether he should receive the death penalty or life in prison without parole. The penalty phase began the next week. This was where prosecutors would argue for death, where they'd present aggravating factors, where they'd show why Stephan deserved the ultimate punishment. And this was where the defense would argue for life, where they'd present mitigating factors, where they'd try to show some humanity in Stephan that was worth preserving. The prosecution went first. They presented the aggravating factors. The victim was a child, 13 years old. The murder was committed during the course of other felonies. Sexual abuse, kidnapping. The murder was especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel. The defendant had a previous pattern of criminal activity. The 60 sexual abuse convictions. Each factor was proven. Each factor supported the death penalty. Then came victim impact statements. Jennifer spoke first. "Stephan Stearns took my daughter from me. He abused her for years. He controlled her. He terrorized her. And when he thought he might get caught, he killed her. He took her life because she was becoming brave enough to speak up, because she was getting strong enough to fight back. He murdered her to protect himself, to keep his secrets, and he did it without mercy, without conscience, without humanity." Madeline was 13 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. She wanted to be an artist. She wanted to go to college. She wanted to travel. She wanted to live. And Stephan took all of that away from her. He took her future. He took her dreams. He took everything. I trusted him. I let him into our lives. I let him near my daughter. And he used that trust to destroy her, to hurt her in ways I can't even comprehend. And then he killed her and left her in the woods like she was nothing. Madeline deserved better. She deserved to live. She deserved justice. And justice means making sure Stephan Stearns can never hurt anyone else ever again. He deserves the death penalty, not because we're vengeful, but because his crimes are so evil, so heinous, so unforgivable that life in prison isn't enough. He took Madeline's life. He should lose his own. Madeline's extended family members spoke. Her grandparents, her aunts and uncles, friends of the family, everyone whose life was destroyed by Stephan's actions. The defense presented their case for life. They called family members, people who knew Stephan as a child, who said he'd had a difficult upbringing, that he'd suffered trauma, that he'd never learned healthy coping mechanisms. They called mental health experts who talked about Stephan's diagnoses, about his inability to function normally, about how prison would be punishment enough. They begged the jury not to add another death to this tragedy, to choose mercy over vengeance, to let Stephan spend the rest of his life in prison thinking about what he'd done. But it rang hollow, because Stephan had shown no mercy to Madeline. He'd abused her for years, killed her, disposed of her body, lied about it, showed no remorse even after being caught. Why should he receive mercy when he'd shown none? Closing arguments in the penalty phase were brief. The prosecution asked for death. The defense asked for life. Then it was in the jury's hands. Florida requires a unanimous jury recommendation for the death penalty. All 12 jurors must agree. If even one juror votes for life, that's the sentence. The jury deliberated for 4 days. It was a weighty decision. Taking someone's life, even through legal execution, isn't something to be decided quickly. On the 4th day, the jury returned. They'd reached a decision. The courtroom was silent. everyone waiting to hear what the jury had decided. The foreperson stood. The judge asked for the verdict. We, the jury, recommend that the defendant, Stephan Stearns, be sentenced to death. Unanimous. All 12 jurors had voted for death. Jennifer cried, but these were different tears. Relief, justice, finally, complete justice for Madeline. Stephan still showed nothing. No fear, no reaction, nothing. The judge scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later. In Florida, the jury recommendation is just that, a recommendation. The judge makes the final decision. But judges rarely go against unanimous jury recommendations, especially in cases this clear, this heinous. 6 weeks later, Stephan Stearns returned to court for formal sentencing. The courtroom was packed again. Everyone wanted to hear the judge's decision. Everyone wanted to see Stephan receive his sentence. The judge addressed the court, reviewed the case, discussed the evidence, talked about the aggravating and mitigating factors. Then he addressed Stephan directly. Mr. Stearns, you have been convicted of systematically abusing a child for years. You have been convicted of murdering that child when she threatened your control. The evidence against you was overwhelming. The jury found you guilty on all counts, and the jury unanimously recommended you receive the death penalty. I have reviewed everything in this case. I have considered the arguments from both sides. I have weighed the aggravating and mitigating factors, and I agree with the jury's recommendation. The crimes you committed against Madeline Soto were among the most heinous I've encountered in my years on the bench. You abused a child who trusted you. You exploited her vulnerability. You used your position in her life to victimize her repeatedly. And when she began to resist, when she began to threaten your ability to continue your abuse, you murdered her. You showed no mercy to Madeline. You showed no conscience. You showed no humanity. You deserve none in return. On the charge of first-degree murder, I hereby sentence you to death. You will be transferred to Florida State Prison to await execution. The gavel came down. Stephan Stearns had been sentenced to death. He was led out of the courtroom, back to jail, where he'd be processed and transferred to death row. Outside the courthouse, Jennifer spoke to media for the last time. Today, justice was served. Madeline's killer has been convicted and sentenced to death. Nothing will bring my daughter back. Nothing will undo the years of abuse she suffered. But at least now, Stephan Stearns will pay the ultimate price for what he did. I hope other parents learn from my story. Be careful who you let into your children's lives. Create environments where children feel safe to disclose. Don't assume someone is safe just because they seem normal. Madeline couldn't speak up while she was alive, so I'm speaking for her now. Her story needs to be told, so other children might be saved and families might be spared this nightmare. Stephan Stearns was transferred to Florida State Prison in Rayford, to death row, where he would wait for his execution. Florida's death row is a grim place. Inmates are in solitary confinement 23 hours a day. 1 hour for recreation in a small, enclosed area. No contact with other prisoners. Minimal human interaction. Meals are delivered to cells. Showers are taken alone. Life is monotonous, isolated. Exactly what someone like Stephan deserves. Death row inmates can have visitors, but Stephan had none. His family wanted nothing to do with him. He had no friends who stood by him. He was completely alone. He could receive mail, and he did. Hate mail from people disgusted by his crimes, but also letters from anti-death penalty advocates, people who opposed capital punishment on principle and offered him spiritual support. Stephan didn't respond to most letters. He spent his days in his cell, eating, sleeping, staring at walls, waiting, because that's what death row is. Waiting. Years, sometimes decades, of waiting while appeals wind through the courts. Stephan's defense team immediately filed appeals. That's standard procedure in capital cases. They'd appeal on various grounds. Challenge evidence. Challenge procedures. Challenge the death sentence itself. These appeals would take years to resolve. Florida's death penalty appeals process is lengthy. Multiple levels of review. State courts, federal courts, Years of legal arguments. It would be a long time before Stephan faced execution, if he ever did. Some death row inmates die of natural causes before their execution dates. Others have their sentences commuted. But for now, Stephan was exactly where he belonged. Locked away, separated from society, unable to hurt anyone else. Jennifer tried to move forward with her life. The trials were over. Stephan had been convicted and sentenced. There was no more legal process to focus on. Now she had to figure out how to live with what happened. How to carry the weight of losing Madeline. The weight of knowing she'd trusted Madeline's killer. She continued therapy, continued working through her trauma, continued speaking publicly about child abuse and grooming. Some people never forgave Jennifer, blamed her for not protecting Madeline, for not seeing what was happening in her own home. But others showed compassion, understood that she was deceived by a skilled manipulator, that predators are expert at hiding their true nature. The truth is complicated. Jennifer made the decision to trust Stephan, to let him into their lives, but she did so believing he was a good person. She had no reason to suspect what he was really doing. Should she have been more vigilant? Maybe. Should she have noticed signs? Possibly. But hindsight is 20/20. It's easy to see red flags after the fact. Much harder to see them in the moment when a predator is actively working to hide them. Jennifer would carry guilt for the rest of her life. That's her burden. But she wasn't the one who abused Madeline. She wasn't the one who killed her. Stephan Stearns did that. He bears the responsibility for his actions. As time passed, Madeline's case faded from daily headlines. Other cases took its place in the news cycle. Other tragedies captured public attention. But for those who'd been touched by Madeline's story, the impact remained, the lessons learned, the awareness created, the changes made. Schools in Kissimmee and surrounding areas maintained their enhanced training. Teachers remained vigilant for signs of abuse, created safe spaces for children to disclose. Child advocacy organizations continued using Madeline's case in their education efforts, teaching parents about grooming, teaching children about body autonomy, teaching everyone about the realities of child sexual abuse. Because statistics show that most child sexual abuse is committed by someone the child knows. Often someone the family trusts, a relative, family friend, parent's romantic partner. Predators don't announce themselves. They blend in. They gain trust. They position themselves to have access to children. And then they exploit that access. Madeline's case was a stark reminder of this reality. Stephan Stearns seemed like a normal person, a good boyfriend, someone who cared about Jennifer and Madeline. But behind closed doors, he was a monster, and he got away with it for years, until he made the ultimate mistake of killing Madeline. That's what finally exposed him. That's what finally brought his crimes to light. But how many other Stephans are out there? How many other children are being abused right now by someone their family trusts? How many more Madelines are suffering in silence? Those questions haunted everyone who worked on this case. The detectives, the prosecutors, the advocates, everyone who saw what happened to Madeline and knew she wasn't the only one. The system failed Madeline. Teachers missed signs. Doctors missed signs. Nobody caught what was happening until it was too late. But that doesn't mean the system can't improve. Madeline's death sparked conversations, created momentum for change, led to better training, better protocols, better awareness. Her death was tragic, senseless, preventable. But if it leads to other children being protected, if it leads to other predators being caught before they can kill, then maybe some good can come from this horror. That's what Jennifer hoped for. That Madeline's story would save lives. That other children would be protected because people learned from what happened. It wouldn't bring Madeline back. Nothing would. But it would honor her memory, would make her short life matter, would ensure she wasn't forgotten. Madeline Soto, 13 years old, daughter, student, artist, dreamer, abused by someone she should have been able to trust, killed when she threatened to speak up, disposed of in the woods like she was nothing. But she wasn't nothing. She was a person, a child with value, with worth. with dreams that deserved to come true. Stephan Stearns took all of that away from her. And now he sits on death row, alone, waiting, knowing that one day justice will be fully served. As of November 2025, Stephan Stearns remains on Florida's death row. His appeals are in progress. The legal process continues. He spends his days in a 6 by 9 foot cell, gray concrete walls, a metal bed, toilet, a sink, nothing else. This is his world now. This is his future. Isolation, monotony, waiting for an execution date that could be years away. He gets 1 hour outside his cell each day, to exercise alone in a small, enclosed yard. No contact with other inmates. No interaction beyond the guards who deliver his meals and escort him to showers. This is what he deserves. A life as empty and isolated as he made Madeline's final years. Florida currently has over 300 inmates on death row. Stephan Stearns is just one of them. But his crimes stand out even among that group. Even among murderers and violent criminals, what he did to Madeline is viewed with particular disgust. Child killers are not respected even in prison. Other inmates know what he did. Know he spent years abusing a child. Know he murdered her to keep his secret. He's despised by everyone around him. He receives no sympathy, no support. He is utterly alone. And that's exactly what he deserves. Jennifer Soto continues living her life, continues grieving her daughter, continues working to honor Madeline's memory through advocacy and education. She's been invited to speak at schools, parent groups, at law enforcement trainings. She shares her story, shares the warning signs she missed, shares what she wishes she'd known. It's painful every time, reliving what happened, acknowledging her failure to protect Madeline, facing judgment from people who think she should have known. But she does it anyway, because if even one parent hears her story and becomes more vigilant, if even one child is protected because of what she shares, then it's worth the pain. She's also become involved with child advocacy organizations, groups that work to prevent child sexual abuse, that provide resources for families, that push for stronger laws and better protections. Madeline's case highlighted gaps in the system. Children who are being abused at home often don't have safe avenues to disclose. Schools need better training. Medical professionals need better screening protocols. The justice system needs to move faster when abuse is reported. Jennifer works to address these gaps, to push for changes, to ensure other families don't experience what she did. She'll never be able to undo what happened, can never bring Madeline back, can never erase the years of abuse her daughter suffered. But she can try to make sure Madeline's death wasn't meaningless, can try to create change, can try to protect other children. The community of Kissimmee has also changed in the wake of Madeline's death. Parents are more cautious, more vigilant, more willing to have difficult conversations with their children about appropriate touch and reporting abuse. Schools have implemented new programs, teaching children about body autonomy, about consent, about the difference between safe touch and unsafe touch, about how to report if something inappropriate happens. These conversations are uncomfortable. Many parents don't want to think about their children being at risk for sexual abuse, don't want to believe it could happen to their family. But Madeline's case proved it can happen anywhere, to anyone, when you least expect it. Stephan Stearns was a normal-seeming person. He had a job. He had a relationship. He functioned in society. Nobody would have guessed what he was doing behind closed doors. That's the terrifying reality. Predators look like everyone else. They could be your neighbor, your coworker, your family member, your partner, which means everyone needs to be vigilant. Everyone needs to watch for signs. Everyone needs to create environments where children feel safe to disclose, because children often don't tell when they're being abused. They're scared. They're ashamed. They're manipulated by their abusers into staying silent. Madeline never told anyone what Stephan was doing to her. She suffered in silence for years, and by the time she was starting to find the courage to speak up, it was too late. Stephan killed her. If this story has moved you to action, if you believe in protecting children and demanding accountability from those who harm them, Please subscribe and turn on notifications. Cases like Madeline's show why we must stay vigilant, stay informed, and never stop fighting for justice. Every subscription helps bring awareness to stories that must be told. Together, we can work toward a world where children are safe. The legal process for Stephan Stearns will continue for years. Appeals, motions, hearings. The wheels of justice turn slowly in capital cases. Could be a decade or more before he faces execution. Some death row inmates never do. They die of natural causes first, or have their sentences commuted, or win appeals that result in new sentences. But regardless of what ultimately happens to Stephan, one thing is certain. He will never be free. He will never walk the streets again. He will never have the opportunity to hurt another child. He stole Madeline's future. His future is now gone as well. He'll spend whatever years he has left in that concrete cell. Alone. Forgotten. Exactly as he deserves. Madeline Soto's story is tragic. Heartbreaking. Infuriating. A 13-year-old girl who deserved to grow up. To pursue her dreams. To live a full life. Instead, she was abused for years by someone who was supposed to care for her, and then murdered when she threatened to expose her abuser. It's a story that should never have happened. Madeline should be alive today, should be in high school, should be planning for college, should be living her life. But she's not, because Stephan Stearns took that from her. And now the best that can be done is to make sure her death matters, to make sure other children are protected, to make sure the system improves, to make sure justice is served. Stephan Stearns was convicted. He was sentenced to death. He sits on death row waiting for his execution. That's justice in the legal sense. But it doesn't bring Madeline back, doesn't undo what she suffered, doesn't heal the wounds her death created. True justice would be Madeline alive, thriving, living the life she deserved. But that's impossible now. So we do what we can. We remember her. We learn from her story. We protect other children in her honor. We make sure Madeline Soto is not forgotten. We make sure her death serves a purpose. We make sure the evil that took her life doesn't take her memory too. Rest in peace, Madeline. You deserved so much better. You deserved to live. You deserved to be safe. You deserved protection that you didn't receive. Your story is told now. Your suffering is known. And your killer is paying the price. May you rest in peace. May your memory inspire change. May other children be protected because of the lessons learned from your tragedy. Madeline Soto, February 2011 to February 2024. Gone but never forgotten. Justice for Madeline. Stay safe out there. Protect the children in your life. Watch for signs. Create safe spaces for disclosure. And I'll see you in the next case.